Hello ladies and gentlemen, my name is TotalHabile. Welcome to What Is, a show dedicated towards explaining what the chosen game is and if it's worth your money. Today we are diving into Warhammer 40,000 Gladius Relics of War. Besides having a god-awful long name, might as well add and knuckles to it, is a game that is published by Slitherine Ltd and developed by Proxy Studios, creators of Pandora First Contact and their upcoming game Xiphon that looks about the same game but without the Game Workshop's intellectual property. After looking upon older works of the developer, they appear to be making the same kind of game and might as well be making the same game with minor tweaks with a different coat of paint thrown on top. Is that necessarily a bad thing? No. But if things are done repeatedly without innovation, that could lead to stagnation of skill for the developers. For the remainder of the video, I'm going to refer the game to as Gladius. Gladius is designed as a top-down 4X strategy game. The 4X's meaning explore, expand, exploit, and exterminate. The player will choose one side and essentially expand their chosen faction until all of their factions have been exterminated. In the base game, you can select up to one of 4 factions, with the other factions sold separately at a rather steep rate, if I may add. In your $40 purchase, you receive the Imperial Guard, the Starship Troopers of the Universe, Orcs, which are just space orcs, Necrons, ancient Egyptian Terminators, and the poster boys of the series, the Space Marines. Imagine armies of Hulk Hogan's, covered in about 50 trucks worth of metal, and they fight space devils. The game is set in the absurd universe of Warhammer 40,000, a fictional setting set in the distant, grim dark future, made for a tabletop war game that gets semi-canon rewrites on occasion while being owned by an uncaring company. Gameplay can be simply summarized in this simple cycle: research, city improvement, unit production, expansion. You will research technology to gain either a bonus to resources, unlock certain abilities, or unlock new units and buildings to produce. City improvement only serves to increase yields for resources, which increases unit production and the amount of resources you have to spend on more units. This leads to further expansion across the map. This gameplay style is more akin to a stripped-down version of Sid Meier's Civilization. Practically everything in this game, Civilization has and then some. It is blatant that this game takes several cues from Civilization 5, everything from the hex grid of the map, the non-stackable military units, city improvement, citizen growth, and research. Gameplay can be summarized simply as just Civilization 5. With domination victory only enabled, with Warhammer 40,000 painted over top. The game does give the strategy level some flavor with each faction by giving them a few unique gimmicks, to have a little more variation between the factions, other than just the visual aspects for them. For example, the Imperial Guard has inexpensive infantry, long-range artillery, and abilities to increase yields for their cities. Though this does go a long way in helping create more dynamic gameplay between the factions, I believe it needs a little more of a push in that section to become more strategic. As the game stands, it currently feels a little too samey between the factions. There's no one is allowed to really outshine another in a certain area. Everyone just feels the same, just different visual styles. If I can apply the same strategy to every faction, there might be something wrong with your factions and how they are set up. And because that the only way that you can actually win the game is through the elimination of other forces, you're going to find that the gameplay is actually really lackluster. While in Civilization, you don't actually have to have domination to necessarily win. You could win through research, diplomatic, and so on and so forth. While in this game, it's just put everyone in an arena and just say, fight. It will get boring insanely fast after you play 1 or 2 games. There's not really any story to explain what happens in this game, just enough to explain why each faction is there in a cutscene that lasts about probably a paragraph. In short, the chosen faction just lands on a planet and must fight to conquer said planet. Other than that, don't expect anything else story related, or anything else that could bring new light to Warhammer 40,000. The game does give little optional quests to your faction, which seems to showcase certain abilities, but are not required to finish to complete your campaign. One little touch I honestly like is that when you meet a faction in the game, For the first time, you get a little introduction piece written in the form that suits the faction that you just met, as the faction that you are. For example, if you were the Tau and you meet the Chaos Space Marines, they will reference that they have fallen warriors themselves and draws parallels to the Commander Farsight. I like that angle, but I really wish there was more of that stuff going on. But it's only used in these specific instances. It'd be great if there was more of it, but it just feels lackluster when you start looking at everything else. There isn't much to write about when it comes to the visual design of the game. It is simply based off Games Workshop's intellectual property of Warhammer 40,000. And when it comes to that, you can't really say much. Like, they look like they are their counterparts on the tabletop, but other than that, there's not really much to write about when it comes to that sort of thing. The sound design, however, it just feels generic. There are a lot of repeats of sounds, like, for example, the las guns are the exact same sounds when you use the XV25s, if I remember correctly, from the Tau. The last time I checked, one of them is a laser and the other one's a pulse, but they use the same sound designs, and it's just bare bones. It's really just serviceable. Nothing really stands out. For example, like, let's say you use a shotgun from like Doom. You feel that power from just the sound alone. While artillery in this game, it just feels like a whimper in comparison. It just feels generic. It doesn't really stand out. Normally I don't talk about PC options, but I am gonna have to address a few things because there are issues that I find in the options menu. The game does come with a standard fare of PC options such as borderless window, which for some reason this game is called undecorated. I don't know why they decided that. It should just be window or borderless window. Don't be fancy. And I do like that fact that you can disable the 10 to 15 second long cinematics that this game has that you get for your story. Don't know why you really want to skip that, but you have the option to do so. One problem I do have is, like, when you're flickering through your options menu in the drop down sections, is that it's because there is a semi-transparency background to the entire user interface. When things overlap, it makes things really hard to read sometimes and may confuse the player because of the overlapping information. If we can get an option to change the opacity of the interface, that would be much appreciated, but seeing how there's not really any user benefits in the last couple updates, I seriously doubt that there'll be anything coming like that. The overall PC performance works well on Alt. Don't see any outstanding issues relating to any performance nor any real glitches, so that is a big plus for me. And this is after about 16 hours of game time. Time for conclusions on this video. When it comes to price to content on offer for $39.99, you get a framework to play the game, 1 game mode, and 4 factions to play with. This would be alright for an indie game, but do understand this game came out in 2018 and is almost 3 to 4 years old at this point. Games usually depreciate, thus the price and value goes down. Thus their barrier to entry will be lowered. Not for this game because it is a licensed product, meaning that this will never have a price drop unless it's on a sale. This includes all the downloadable content that is already overpriced for what you get. Let's say you play the Tau on the tabletop variant of Warhammer 40,000. Well, if you like to play them in the game, you would first have to purchase the base game, then the faction themselves for an additional $15. So just for those 2 things alone is $55. That is only 1 piece of downloadable content. To me, that is not worth it. To add insult to injury, if you do not purchase any downloadable content, you will still see them in your game, but remains inaccessible, which makes the game feel less whole for what you pay for. There is a reason why a good number of other games hides the content you don't own. You don't want the end user feeling like they're getting nickel and dime at every possible second. If that does happen, then it only devalues your game. And in some circumstances, that could probably be constituted as manipulative, as you're trying to score more money out of people. Back to the price to content ratio. Why is each faction $15? When I make a purchase, I base the downloadable content base off the original asking price for the game. going off each faction should be around $6. But when it starts asking around a third of the price of the game for a single faction, that is an instant no. That's just nickel and diming. One thing that's also pretty bad about this game is that when it comes to downloadable content, there is DLC for your DLC. Let's say you want to play another faction that's not in the base game. You don't get all the units for that faction, as there are content packs that locks away a unit or two behind a paywall. A unit should never be sectioned off into a separate content pack from their faction. That is scummy, like electronics level arts level of scumminess. For example, like the reinforcement pack, fortification pack, assault pack, and a specialist pack. Like, these feel like this should be just a free update that you're paying for, because each one has a unit for about every faction inside the game up to that point of release. This is nickel and diming. Worse still, when gameplay starts to get stale, it gets stale very fast. Literally 1 to 2 games and you're going to put this game away and you're never going to touch it again. Essentially, unless you want to play all the factions or have friends to play this game with, this game will most likely be played once and forgotten about. For what it does, there are more competent games out there that do it better and at a cheaper price. For $40, you get a stripped down, overpriced version of Civilization, and the only real reason why you would get this game is simply because it is Warhammer related. Other than that, please look elsewhere to spend your money. I want to close this on the fact that they sell digital wallpapers for $2, something you get for free by other games or even just looking up on the internet. You can't even leave a review on it. I'm surprised I don't have to pay for patch notes, honestly, when looking at everything about this game. All the DLC is overpriced for what you pay for, and this is all over around just simply not worth it. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for watching the video. If you'd like to help out and support the channel, consider subscribing to stay up to date on informational segments. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all next time.